Ever since I was a kid, I had this kind of stupid habit. You know those little jokes you make just to break the ice, to lighten the mood? Well, my favorite joke was to say that I must have been adopted like out of the blue. We were having dinner, I would say. I bet you guys took me from an orphanage and forgot to tell us. Everyone laughed. My uncles laughed, my grandmother laughed, even my parents laughed, or at least they seemed to laugh. It was almost a catchphrase of mine. And over time it became routine. And honestly, I thought it was funny. Because, honestly, I never imagined it could be real. I grew up with these people. I was part of the family. There was no reason to doubt it. But if there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that too many jokes hide the truth. One day, at a Sunday lunch, with the house full, everyone gathered together, I said it again. Maybe you guys adopted me and forgot to tell us, huh? This time, something was different. First, the silence. You know that silence that invades the room as if someone had turned off the sound of the world? That was it. No one answered. No one laughed. Then I looked at my mother. She was standing there, fork in the air, with her eyes wide open. My father forced a laugh, but looked away. My grandmother looked down and started to pick at her plate, as if she had forgotten how to eat. At that moment, I felt butterflies in my stomach, a discomfort that I couldn't explain. Guys, it was a joke, I said, laughing nervously, but no one laughed back. My mother left the table without saying a word, and I was left there, with that echo in my head, what if? That was when everything started to fall apart. Because until then, it had just been a harmless joke, a phrase thrown into the air, but now it had become a real doubt. And a doubt that, if I followed through, there might be no turning. Backed out to understand how that silence hit me hard, you need to know what my family was like. I grew up in what most people would call a normal American family. A house in the suburbs, a 2-car garage, a golden retriever. My dad worked in construction management, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. We barbecued on Sundays, watched football, and argued about politics at Thanksgiving, you know, the classic middle-class package. I have a younger brother, Josh. He's 3 years younger. And growing up, we did all the typical sibling things. We fought over the Xbox, built tents out of pillows, got punished together. We were close, even if we got on each other's nerves. It never crossed my mind that I might not belong in that household, but now, looking back, there were signs, subtle signs, that I'd rather not see. First, the obvious. I didn't look like them. My parents and Josh are blonde, blue-eyed, and super fair-skinned, like those people who burn in the sun in 5 minutes. I was always the darkest one. Dark hair, tan skin, brown eyes. As a kid, I never paid attention. Families don't have to be all the same, right? Genetics are weird. At least that's what I told myself. But the jokes started early. At every family gathering, someone would say, "Where did we get you from, huh?" Or, "That guy's the mailman's son." Always laughing, always joking. Or at least that's what I thought. Then came the photo thing. One day, I asked my mom why she didn't have any photos of me while she was pregnant, like the ones she had of Josh. He had entire albums, ultrasounds, belly selfies, even a gender reveal cake. Me. Just a few photos after I got home, she said she lost a bunch of old photos due to a computer problem. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But things started piling up, like my grandmother. My dad's mom, who was always a little more distant with me. He was never mean, just ... formal, like I was the neighbor's kid who was always around. He called Josh our boy, and I was just him. One time, when I was about 10, I found a strange document in my mother's drawer. It had my full name on it, but listed other names as biological parents. I showed it to her, and she snatched it from my hand like it was a state secret. "It's just old hospital paper," she said, with a half-hearted smile. And then came the comment. I must have been about 13, and a neighbor of ours, retired Army veteran, was talking to my father in the garage. I walked over, and the guy looked at me, then at my father, and said, "Is that really yours? Doesn't look much like you." My father laughed. My mother froze, and I didn't know what to think, but I never followed up, because deep down, I didn't want to know. But after that lunch, of that silence, of that look from my mother, everything came crashing down. Every awkward moment, every ignored question, every forced laugh, it all made sense. That night, I couldn't sleep. My head was spinning. I relived every memory, looking for signs I'd never seen. And the next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I went into my parents' room, my heart racing, and asked them directly, "Mom, am I adopted?" The whole thing started with a joke. A silly joke, one I'd been telling for years. It was like my usual trick at family gatherings. That phrase I'd say just to get laughs when the conversation got boring. "Maybe I'm adopted, and you forgot to tell me, right?" It worked every time. Guaranteed laughs. My uncle would say, "Uh-huh, of course," from the post office. My grandmother would say, "That boy," shaking her head with a little smile. My mother would laugh. My father would laugh. Josh would laugh. It was just another one of my jokes. But this time, it was different. It was a Sunday, lunch with the whole family. The table was full, the smell of roast beef, loud laughter, the typical American Sunday. Movie. And then I blurted out almost automatically, "Seriously, you have to. I'm adopted. It's obvious." But there was no laughter. None. For a second time stopped. You know that silence that hurts your ears? That was it. As if everyone had forgotten how to breathe. I looked around. My father had his fork halfway to his mouth, frozen. My mother, man, her expression, it was as if someone had pressed the panic button inside her. She dropped her napkin on her lap and lowered her eyes. Her breathing became visibly heavy. Josh looked at her, then at me, with that look on his face that said, "What's going on here?" My heart started racing. Something was wrong, very wrong. I tried to break the ice. I gave a nervous laugh and said, "Guys, I'm just kidding. Relax." But no one relaxed. My mother got up and left the table. Just like that. Without saying anything, he went straight upstairs. My father got up right away and followed him. Josh stared at me like I had just dropped a bomb. At that moment, the joke turned into suspicion, and the suspicion turned into fear. Sat there, staring at my plate. With the sound of the TV in the background, trying to cover the emotional vacuum that had settled in the room, my aunt tried to start a conversation with someone else. My grandmother pretended to be absorbed in her salad, but I could feel it in the air. Something had broken, and I could no longer pretend it was just another Sunday lunch. I went to my parents' room and knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again. "Mom, silence. I need to know." She opened the door. Her eyes were red. Her face was pale. I stood there in the doorway. She took a deep breath, and finally she said, "Yes, you are adopted." There were 3 seconds of silence, but it felt like an eternity. It was as if my entire life had changed colors in that instant. I stood still, literally frozen. The kind of paralysis that isn't physical, it's emotional. As if my brain had frozen and didn't know what to do with that information, my mother remained there, in front of me, waiting for me to say something. Anything. But what do you say after hearing that? You're adopted. 3 words that changed everything. I sat on the edge of the bed, still silent. She sat too, but in a far corner, and there we stayed for a few seconds that seemed like hours. The room was quiet. All I could hear was the muffled noise of the TV coming from the living room and the ticking of the clock on the wall. But inside my head, a hurricane. I finally spoke, my voice breaking. "Since when did you know that?" She answered, almost whispering. "Since always." Those words hurt more than the previous yes, because it meant that all this time, all these years, they knew, and they chose not to tell me. From my first steps, my first words, the first time I played Hero's Son. They knew, and they pretended. "Why did you keep this from me?" She took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. She seemed to be struggling with years of accumulated guilt. "We wanted to protect you. You were so little, so vulnerable, and as time went on, it got harder to tell you. With every birthday, every Christmas, every hug, the truth seemed further away. We were afraid of losing you, of changing the way you saw us." She started to cry, and as angry as I wanted to be, all I could feel at that moment was emptiness, a pit in my stomach, because part of me understood, but another part was devastated. Like I had lived a life based on a half-truth. "Who are my biological parents?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She hesitated. "Teenagers. Your grandparents were not in a position to raise you, and they were not mature enough. They gave up custody right after you were born. We filed for adoption when you were still in the neonatal intensive care unit. You had just been born. that part hit me in a strange way. I was in a hospital, alone, before I even had a name. It was hard to process. And you never thought I had the right to know. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears every day. Believe me, but the fear was greater. At that moment, there was no right answer. There was no way to erase the past. And there was also no way to process everything at once. It was too much to take in. But something inside me began to change. Because, despite the secrecy, the pain, the silence, I looked at her and I still saw my mother, the one who took care of me when I had a fever, who watched my school performances, who cried when I started college. The truth had hurt, but the love was still there. After that conversation with my mother, nothing seemed real. Walking around the house was like visiting a museum of my own life. The photos on the wall, the school trophies, the notes from my childhood, everything was still there, intact. But now, everything had a different filter. As if I had put on glasses and finally seen the blurred details of my own story, I felt like a stranger in my own family. In the following days, our coexistence became strange. Not bad exactly, but fraught. My parents tried to act normally, but I could see the care in their gestures, as if they were afraid of breaking me, that any wrong word would make me leave. And perhaps the hardest part of all was dealing with my father's silence. He didn't talk to me about the subject until the third day. He called me to talk in the backyard with that attitude of a man who grew up without knowing how to deal with emotions. I wanted to tell you many times, but I didn't know how. I just wanted you to know that, ... To me, you are my son. Always have been, always will be. And that broke me a little inside, because I knew he was telling the truth. But knowing that didn't erase the hole that had opened up in my chest. In the following days, I began to ask myself who I really was. Who were these people who brought me into this world? Where were they now? Did they know I existed? Did they think about me? My mother gave me what she had: their names, a copy of the adoption process, and an envelope with a letter that, according to her, was left by the biological mother on the day of the legal transfer of custody. I stared at that envelope for hours. It was as if it burned in my hand when I finally opened it. I read something that completely disarmed me. If you are reading this, it is because you have grown up. I just want you to know that you were loved from the first second, that giving you up was the hardest decision of my life. But I wanted you to have a chance, a family that could give you everything I couldn't. I cried. I cried badly, for the first time since everything came to light. Because there was confirmation of what I needed to know most, I was not discarded. I was loved, just from afar. And then the dilemma arose. Should I go after her? Part of me wanted to. I wanted to put a face to that shaky signature. I wanted to understand why, to hear it from her. But another part was afraid. Fear of reopening wounds. Fear of discovering more difficult truths. Fear of messing up the life of someone who might have moved on. For now, I've decided not to look. I need time to understand who I am. Now, to redefine my story not as a lie, but as something more complex, more real, because in the end, I didn't lose a family. I gained 2 stories, and now it's up to me to decide how they meet. Today, when I think about all this, I don't feel angry anymore. I won't lie. For a while, I did. I felt betrayed, deceived, excluded from an important part of my own life. But now, I see it differently. My parents, the ones who raised me, are human. They did the best they could with what they had. They made a decision based on fear. Yes, but also on love. Real love. The kind of love that changes diapers in the middle of the night. That teaches you to ride a bike. That makes you cry in secret on the first day of school. And my biological parents, they gave me the greatest gift possible, the chance at a better life. They made a choice that must have hurt every day since then. I will never fully understand what it meant to them, but I respect it. I'm still processing everything, some days. I feel stronger for knowing the truth. Other days, I still feel a little lost, but I know I'm not alone. And if you're watching this video and have been through or are going through something similar, know that you're not either. Family isn't just the people who bring you into this world. Family is the people who stay when the world falls apart. The people who choose to love you every day, even on the bad days. What if you were adopted? Would you want to know? Or would you prefer never to find out? Comment below. I'm curious to know what you think about this.